Hello, in this video lesson I'm going to show you how to sharpen up a shot to create a print with more punch using Photoshop Element's various sharpening commands. Here's a close-up of the before image. You can see there's not that much detail in these soft focused areas here, but after a bit of sharpening we've teased out more delicate hair detail, and I'll show you how to do that in the Camera Raw editor and then in the various tools in the standard editor as well. But let's start from scratch by going to File, Open, and then browsing to our raw start file, which is called sharpenbefore.dng. That just stands for digital negative file, and that's a raw format file which will open up in the Camera Raw editor. So let's click Open here, and here we can see our shot in the Camera Raw editor. Now the first thing to do is to grab the zoom tool and then right click and choose 100%, because that's the only way we can really see how soft the shot really is, and indeed how sharp it's going to be after we've tweaked a few sliders. So let's hold the spacebar down to get the hand tool, and let's drag to have a look at a detailed area such as this area here, where you can see a little bit of the horn and some of the delicate fur detail as well, and you can see with a naked eye that it's looking a little bit soft. Now all sharpening does is it increases contrast around delicate details such as these and makes them look sharper, and to do that we need to use this tab here, which is the Detail tab. So click on that to select it. Now by default the raw editor tends to add a sharpening amount of 25, and the amount slider is increasing the contrast around edges in the shot, but I've set these all to 0 so you can see what they do as we bring them in one by one. But let's set an amount of 100 to increase the contrast change, and you should see a change in the shot immediately as it gets slightly sharper. To compare it before and after, just click Preview. There's a slightly softer version. Click again to see the slightly sharper version, but it's not going to be really sharp until we increase the spread of the contrast change using the radius slider. So if I take that up to about 2, you'll get more impact in these areas here, and indeed in the delicate textures on the horn. So there's the before, much softer. There's the after, a lot sharper now. So to recap, the amount slider increases the strength of the contrast change and teases out more delicate detail, and the radius slider increases the spread of the contrast change around edges, and that gives you an even sharper looking shot. But you don't want to go too high with these settings here, or you'll start to add sharpening artifacts, which we'll see in just a tick when we start to reveal even more detail using this slider here. To help you spot these artifacts that we're trying to avoid, I'm going to set this to a high value like 100%, and you'll then see we've got lots of noise appearing in the sky there, and this looks rather posterized and artificial, almost like a painting, and you can see there's a halo down the bottom here under the horn as well. So these are all sharpening artifacts that you don't want to get when you're trying to sharpen your shot in a subtle way. So what we can do is drag detail back to 0 to then remove all of the artifacts. And here's a cool tip: when you start to bring in detail, if you hold the Alt key and click and drag, you can see exactly which areas are being sharpened because they look darker than the neutral grey. And as I go to the right, you can then see that we're starting to add a little bit more noise to these blank sky areas. You can see the halo is getting stronger there now, and if I go too far to the right, you can then see the noise appearing more clearly. So that's a great way of previewing which areas are being sharpened. So a value of around about 50 is a good compromise between bringing out delicate detail and avoiding nasty noise and horrible halos. You can still see a little bit of noise in the sky, so the masking slider is designed to limit the amount of sharpening to more busy areas. If we alt click and hold on that, you'll see a white preview, and as we drag to the right, then it starts to get darker, and the dark bits are areas that are being removed from the sharpening, so you can see the sky is now being protected. So if we take this to around about 67, then you can see that we're sharpening up the delicate hair details, but we're not sharpening up details in the sky, for example, and that's a great way of just selectively sharpening the shot while keeping artifacts at bay. If I let go now, we should have got rid of that nasty noise, but we're still seeing sharpening in these areas here. Let me just tick preview to see the before, very blurry and soft. Click again, and it's now looking much sharper, but the artifacts are being kept to a minimum. Now that we've used these two sliders to reveal more detail, we can then fine-tune the amount setting by dropping that down to about 80, and we can then set the radius to a little bit lower by about 1.6 or so, just to make it less of a spread, and that helps to reduce this artifact down here, this little haloing that we had around the edge of the horn. So you can see we've got quite a selection of sharpening tools here that work together to produce a decent result. So that's how you sharpen up in the Camera Raw editor. Now what you could do is click Done, and all these settings will be saved, so you can then open the file later and fine tune them if need be, or you could click Open Image to take the shot into the standard Photoshop Elements editor and then carry on editing it or saving it as a JPEG, for example, to share online. But what I'm going to do is show you how to sharpen up in the standard editor, because you might not like to shoot in RAW, and therefore you might need to use the standard editor's sharpening tools. So what I'll do is set these all to 0. You need to drag radius to the far left. It'll only go down to 0.5, but don't worry about that. And then we'll set the other two to 0 as well. So once you've zeroed all these sliders, it's gone back to its original blurry status. We can then click Open Image to open it up in the standard editor. I can then show you the tools here that will enable you to sharpen your JPEGs. So let's pop up to the zoom tool and right click and set this to actual pixels, which is the same as viewing the shot at 100%. Hold the spacebar to get the hand tool, and then let's have a look at a similar area and let's sharpen that up using the tools here. Now before we sharpen, it's worth clicking on the background thumbnail like that and pressing Command or Control J to create a copy. We can then sharpen the copy and compare it with the original later on. Now there's lots of different ways to sharpen up a shot in Photoshop Elements main editor. If you go up to Enhance, you can see we've got this Auto Sharpen option. So if we click and apply that, it's applying the Adjust Sharpness filter, and that brings out some of the delicate details, but it's quite a subtle result and you don't really have any control over the increase in the contrast or the spread of the radius. So let's go to Edit and undo Adjust Sharpness for the moment. If you're in a hurry but you don't want to spend too much time, you can always pop up to the quick editing mode by clicking here and then pop down to the Sharpen option. And this enables you to either drag a slider or click Preview Thumbnails and then get a preview of what the sharpening is going to look like at a particular incremental setting, such as 437 for example. You can see we've got nice sharpened details there, but there's a hint of halo on the bottom of the horn. So if you're not too happy with how this is working, you can always click here to go back to the original result, and we'll use another technique. So click on the Expert tab, then pop up to Enhance, and let's go down to Adjust Sharpness, and that automatically zooms in to 100% so we can see an accurate assessment of the softness and then the sharpness of the shot. So let's find an area such as this so we can see a bit of the horn and a bit of the fur. This command works in a very similar way to that in the Camera Raw editor. We can set the amount to 100% to increase the contrast change, and then spread out that change by increasing the radius to 2. Then click on the preview window and hold down the mouse button to see the before version, let go, and there's the sharper after version. You can fine-tune things by using the Remove drop-down menu. If you set that to Lens Blur, it produces a more subtle effect and it gets rid of the halo that we had, and we can then push up the amount a little bit more now to 120 for a little bit more contrast change. There's the before, bit soft looking, let go, and there's the sharper after version. Now we're using lens blur, which is removing the soft focus from our original shot. But if there was some camera shake and a low shutter speed was being used, you might have some motion blur, and if you have that, then you might try using the motion blur drop down option and then dragging the angle slider to try and counteract the direction of the motion blur. That sounds like a great idea in theory, but in practice it doesn't work very well at all, unless you upgrade to Photoshop CC, and that has a new shake reduction command which is much more effective and much more powerful than this motion blur option. So let's drop that back down to lens blur. Another thing that sounds like a good idea is more refined. When you tick this, it tends to bring out more delicate details, but it also increases noise, and indeed we've got some horizontal banding as well, so that's not working particularly well in this case. So I tend to leave more refined unticked, even though it looks like a good idea at the time. So when you're happy with your sharpening settings such as these, you can click OK to apply them to the shot. There you go. I'm just going to grab the zoom tool, right click, go to actual pixels to get a closer look, and then if I turn off the top layer, you can see the original soft layer below, turn it on again, and you can see the sharpened pixel details. And then if you're happy, you can go to File, go to Save As, and you can either preserve the layers by saving it as a TIFF with layers ticked, or if you go to JPEG, you can click here, and that will save it as a JPEG version which you can upload to your Facebook gallery, for example, or print out. So lots of different ways to sharpen up your shots in Photoshop Elements, Camera Raw Editor, the Quick Editor, and indeed the Expert Editor.